Hey, what is up, YouTube? It is the Dual Threat Podcast here. Just gonna go over our weekly segment of how teams can make the playoffs. Make sure to like and sub, and hit that notification bell as well. As you can see, a lot of people are not subbed that watch our videos, so please sub. It would help us out tremendously. Almost at that 100 sub mark, so that would mean a lot to us. Uh, we got Jacob here with us. He's not actually here with us because of again personal complications. We've had a lot of those this week. That's why we're kind of behind schedule. So we'll try to get back on track as soon as we can. Make sure to follow us on Twitter as well at the Dual Threat, or just Dual Threat, excuse me. Jacob, how are you tonight, man?
Dude, I'm doing awesome. Yeah, like you said, just like college football, COVID's kind of derailing the podcast, but the show must go on, and glad to be here.
Yeah, definitely. So this week we're gonna go over Jacob and I's one of our favorite teams to watch at least, and that is the Florida Gators. Currently ranked number six after just demolishing number 12, or who was number 12, or are they number 12 now? They're number 12 now. Georgia, 44-28, and we're gonna kind of go through the rest of their schedule, including possibly making that SEC championship now that they've knocked Georgia out of the way. This upcoming weekend, they've got Arkansas as long as there's no COVID test, because that seems to be kind of going around to the SEC with Alabama's game and A&M's game as well. So, what do you think about this upcoming weekend, Jacob, against Arkansas?
Yeah, I tell you what, we've been talking about it forever. Florida has a dynamic, dominant offense, and I mean they're averaging 42.4 a game. Their defense has been where it's lacking, and they give up 29 a game, which at first glance really doesn't look that bad. But I mean, you look at some of the teams it's against. They gave up 24 to South Carolina, 35 to Ole Miss, whose offenses actually look pretty good, and then they ended up giving up 28 to Georgia. I think that their offense is going to be too much for Arkansas this weekend, but I do think that Arkansas, with how bad Florida's defense has been playing, I do think Arkansas could put up some numbers, but I could imagine Florida's going to win this game by probably 21, whether it's 40 to 61 or whatever. I think they're gonna pull this one off with a big offensive performance.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm really excited to watch Felipe Franks go back in the swamp for the first time. I think it's at the swamp. Maybe it's yeah. I'm really excited to see that. I'm excited to see how they're going to react to that, with him leaving and going to Arkansas and all. He's actually been a pretty good quarterback at Arkansas. I think Jacob and I talked about this before. He really had high standards at Florida because Florida's really one of more of those like elite teams in college football, and so he's held to a really high standard. And he goes to Arkansas that has a lower standard, and he's kind of playing a little bit better, but I think a lot of people think he's improved tremendously just because now he's held to a really low standard. Um, and so I'm really excited to see Felipe. Yeah, I think that game is going to be either a 14-point game or a 38, just depending on how good Florida's defense can show up, or how much they can show up that weekend. I mean, and then you go to like the rest of their schedule. They're not playing another ranked team as currently. They're not. Nobody is ranked. You got Vanderbilt, Kentucky, Tennessee, and then you got that postponed game against LSU. They're going to be favored in every single one of these games, and probably by more than 14 points apiece. Um, I might be kind of crazy, but I think Arkansas and Kentucky might be their best competitors for the rest of the season, at least regular season. Um, who do you see as their biggest competitor going forward?
No, I think you nailed it. I personally think it's Arkansas, because Tennessee's been bad. Kentucky has been bad offensively. Vanderbilt, and LSU. I mean, we saw what happened in that Auburn game. Like you said, I think this is a cakewalk to the SEC championship against Bama, and that's where Florida's going to have to prove themselves. That's where, if they want to make the playoff, that's the game that they're going to need to win, and it's going to be fun to watch. Two extremely high-powered offense. This kind of reminds me of um, Clemson versus Bama in the Natties the past couple of years. It just feels like Florida's offense is that elite, and Kyle Trask is playing out of his mind. 1,800 yards, 22 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions. And um, I think, like I said, cakewalk for the rest of the year, and that SEC championship is the big one that determines their season for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The thing with Florida is they couldn't lose the SEC championship because they have that loss to A&M, and we talked about this in another video. No, Florida shouldn't be ranked above A&M, regardless of how better you think Florida of a team is than A&M, and hypothetical games, whether you think they should, if they played again, they would win. There are no hypotheticals. There are what already happened, and A&M won that game at home by 3. So if Florida's going to get to the playoffs, they're going to have to beat Alabama in the SEC championship. But the good thing for Florida is, in my personal opinion, I think Florida has the best chance against Alabama. Um, you talked about the high-powered offenses like Alabama and Clemson. I think that game's going to remind me a lot of Alabama versus LSU last year, with Joe Burrow and Tua kind of going at it. I think it was a high-scoring game, like 44-50 or something like that. I'm really excited to watch that game. Granted, everybody wins out, everything goes okay. Um, who do you think wins that game?
It's hard to not go with Bama just because Kyle Trask is playing out of his mind, and so is Mac Jones. I do think Bama has a pretty significantly better defense than Florida does. And I also think a big part of Bama's game that Florida is lacking, a huge part actually, is the run game. Because you look at Najee Harris, and he is, I mean, he has everything points to him being an elite NFL talent, and he's really taking the pressure off of Mac Jones all the time. And it feels like Kyle Trask, every play, is doing everything for the Gators. Him and Kyle Pitts, he has 24 receptions for 414 yards and 8 touchdowns. He had like 6 through the first 6 quarters of the season. I think the two places where Bama excels over Florida is the run game and their defense. And that's why I think Bama wins that game. I don't at all put it out of the question of Florida winning, and I think it's going to be close. And that is the big question mark for where their season lies, whether they can win that football game against an elite team, because they lost to A&M, who is looking great this season. They beat the brakes off of Georgia, and it just seems like they need that other elite win, because Georgia was elite. Everybody thought they were elite, number 5, after beating really nobody, it feels like, other than Auburn, who was 7 at the time and now is not ranked, or 24 or something like that. So it feels like Georgia was overrated just as a whole, and so I don't think anybody really knows how a big win over Georgia, what that actually equates to. And so I think this is the real test for Florida. This is where they come out and say, our offense is better than Bama's, better than everybody else in the country. We put that to the test, and they just come out and show out and beat Bama, and that's how they get to the playoff.
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree with you on taking Bama. I mean, it's hard not to. Their offense is just so dominant, just like Florida's is, but you're right, that defense really has it over the edge. You look at their common biggest matchup this year, and that was probably against Georgia. Um, Both very similar scores: 44-28 for Florida, 41-24 for Alabama. The difference is, though, Georgia had a lot of missing defensive players when Florida played them, and I'm not taking anything away from Florida there, but I'm saying I think Alabama's win over them was a little bit more impressive than Florida's win over them, just because of those missing players. I will tell you what I was really impressed with this Florida Georgia game, and it was the depth of wide receivers that Florida has. Really, I think a lot of people were looking at Kyle Pitts. I mean, greatest tight end in the country, I think, by far. He gets injured. I think it was a close game at that point, and then the very next play, they throw a touchdown. Kyle Trask throws a touchdown to that backup tight end, and I don't know if it's the system. I don't know if it's the wide receivers. I don't know if it's the quarterback. As much as I love Kyle Trask, but their offense looks dominant, and you're right, they don't have that run game as like great as they'd want it as Alabama does. But looking at Alabama's defense, it's going to be tough to drop these kind of numbers that they had against Georgia's, I would say, backups in some way. Um, I think Florida playing Arkansas this weekend is going to be a good say of of their offense a little bit more than playing against Georgia's half backups. So I'm excited to watch that game. But yeah, I absolutely think it's Bama versus Florida in the SEC championship. And if Florida loses, you can't put them in the championship. Uh, Depending on the rest of the season, it might be BYU, Cincinnati, A&M, some Big Ten team that surprises us, like Indiana or maybe even Wisconsin going 5-0 and going in or something like that. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think Bama wins that game. I think they get in. But if Florida wants to get in, they're going to have to beat Bama in the championship.
Yeah, I think so. I pulled up the stats because I was curious how Florida and Bama matched up offensively. Like I said, Najee Harris has 714 rushing yards, which is nuts. Damian Pierce, Florida's running back, has 221. That is a 500 rushing yard difference between their leading rushers. Bama's second rusher, Brian Robinson, has 208 yards, almost as many as Damian Pierce has. Bama has a better O-line. Mac Jones and Kyle Trask are playing, it seems like, pretty equal. Granted, Bama also had an extra game that Florida missed because of COVID. Yeah. So you have to take that into account. But also looking at the receivers, Devontae Smith has 760 yards. Jalen Waddle in the 3 or 4 games that he played had 557. They're both dynamic. They're both explosive, dominant offenses, and it's going to be interesting to see how they fare against each other because you look at, for example, like Ohio State Clemson or Bama Clemson every year. Bama and Clemson are historically, at least the last few years, they're known to have great offense, great defense. But in those big games, the defense just doesn't show up. LSU, Bama last year. If everybody was like, Bama's defense is good enough to contain Joe Burrow at least a little bit, and it wasn't. And so I think if Florida's going to come out of here and with a statement win, a statement game, they're going to have to prove that offense wins championships in college football and they have the best offense in the country. And I could see it 100%. I don't necessarily think it's going to happen, but I could see that game going either way because I think Kyle Pitts not only is the best tight end in the country, but the best pass catcher in general in the country and the most dominant receiver of any kind. And Kadarius Toney, I think, is pretty slept on. I mean, he has 29 receptions, 339 yards, and 6 touchdowns in one less game than everybody else has had. And I personally think Florida, the big thing for them is get their run game going a little bit, get their defense a little bit better, and then we'll see what happens. And like you said, the Georgia game, their defense they played okay. Georgia's not known to have a great offense, and they also didn't have George Pickens, their starter receiver, which hurts a lot. And so it's hard to judge how well Florida's defense actually did play against that Georgia team. But they only put up really 21 points because Georgia's backup scored at the end, kind of. And I guess it was sort of still close at that point, but it felt like, at least with Stenson Bennett in, they really only gave up 21 points, which it didn't feel terrible. It felt like their defense was winning the possessions and their offense was just dominant. So I think that game could go either way. I do give Bama the slight edge, but I do give Florida a chance for sure.
Yeah, and just going back off what you said, you look at pretty much since when the college football playoffs was put into place, every single one of these teams has had an elite offense. And in college football, elite offenses wins championships. And I think we both can agree that Florida has that type of elite offense this year. It's just They have these elite offenses, but they have a defense that's good enough to stop the other elite offense on the other team, at least for a few possessions for you to get that lead. I'm not saying you have to hold Alabama to 20 points to win that game, but both Florida and Alabama are going to put up 50 points every game. So you got to be able to hold them to 40, maybe get a turnover, get one or two stops, force them to punt, maybe hold them even to a field goal, and that wins you the game. And yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see if Florida's defense can really step it up from here on out. I think they've improved just a lot since the beginning of the season, um, especially their passing game. I think their defense game still needs a little bit of work. So going off of what we're saying, say Florida does end up losing in the SEC championship, who would you like to see them play in a bowl game?
I've said this for a while. I personally think that, and this was, to be fair, this was back when I thought Clemson was going to beat Notre Dame. So it changes things a little bit. But I thought my prediction for the playoff was Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Texas A&M. Again, thinking Notre Dame was going to lose both games to Clemson this season. So I personally really wanted to see the two non-conference teams, BYU and Cincinnati, play each other in a bowl game because they're basically the same team, right? They
I agree.
play nobody and win every game by 40. And so I was interested to see them play, and I wanted to see Florida play Notre Dame, which could still happen depending on how things shape up. If Clemson comes out and beats Notre Dame by 30 in that ACC championship, they're obviously not going to make the playoff. So I think if they didn't and Florida loses to Alabama, I would love to see them play. I would also, if Notre Dame sneaks into that fourth playoff spot and A&M gets knocked out, I would love to see that rematch. I don't necessarily think it would happen, as unfortunate as it is to say. I would love to see it, but I don't know if they would put that bowl game together. But I guess we'll see. And one other little thing about that Alabama game, and I might catch some flack for saying this. This Florida team feels like LSU's team from last year. Elite quarterback play, elite offensive play all season long. Defense was rough at the beginning of the year. Look at LSU last year. Second game of the year, I believe, when they played Texas. I mean, that was way too close of a game. It was like 38-44, whatever. I don't remember the exact final. But their defense was horrible at the beginning of the year. And as the year progressed, they got healthy, they got better, and their defense was good. You look at A&M's game against LSU last year, it was like 50-7. And again, A&M wasn't the team they are today, but they were better than 7 points against LSU, against their defense in the beginning of the year. So that shows teams can change throughout the year. And I'm very, very interested to see how Florida adapts and how they get better on the defensive side of the ball. Because if they do, they can run the table. I personally believe it. And you look at a team like Clemson, their defense is hurt and not been playing great. And I think a team like that, them and Florida are very similar teams in my eyes in the fact of defense isn't playing well now, but it can get better. And I'm very excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if Florida weren't to get in, I think the top ACC team that doesn't get in, I would love to watch them play, whether that be Clemson or Notre Dame. If it's Miami, I think I'd rather go to the Big Ten team that doesn't get in, whether that's Indiana, Wisconsin, or Ohio State. I don't want to see them against, like you said, the Cincinnati BYU. I'd love to see them play each other. I talked about that recently on the pod. And what I would hate to see is Florida versus a Big 12 team, because I don't think the Big 12 is very good this year. I know week one was kind of hard on a lot of teams, but you've got half of the top of your conference losing to Sun Belt teams like Arkansas State, and then now you're at the top. I mean, not even Texas or Oklahoma's at the top. They're like fourth and fifth, and they're still, the highest chance of winning that conference. So maybe Florida versus Oklahoma, but I think Florida wins that game by 21. I would love to see like Florida versus Indiana, two pretty high-powered offenses. Yeah. But I think Florida versus Notre Dame is really what I would like to see the most out of all these, out of all of the combinations that we've got here. And like you said, I'm really excited to see how their defense can progress this year. I think they've got a long way to go, but I think they can get there. Florida is known for having a good defense most of the time. It's kind of like how LSU was. Really, just the SEC in general is known for having good defenses, and typically they do get there, at least the top half of SEC teams. So definitely looking forward to that. And you got anything else, Jacob?
Yeah, just you're talking about the Big 12. I think it's going to be interesting. Oklahoma and Oklahoma State play next week, and I believe Oklahoma State's at the top of the Big 12 right now. One of the two or three teams that are up there.
Technically, Iowa State is because they have five.
Are they tied with Oklahoma State?
Well, Oklahoma State has only played five conference.
Oklahoma State's 5-1. Um, but anyway, I think yeah. So okay, you're right. Iowa State's at the top, but Oklahoma State is in second, and so they would play in the Big 12 championship. I do think Oklahoma State next week is a huge game for the Big 12 because it feels like Oklahoma has been getting better, and so if Oklahoma gets better, obviously they're not making the playoff. The Big 12 is out of the playoff. That's off the table. But it feels like Oklahoma is getting better, and I think they would give them a better chance of playing. Maybe not Florida, but say A&M's number 5. Say something crazy happens and Notre Dame and Clemson are both in, and A&M's 5, Florida's 6. I think they would consider putting Oklahoma against A&M in like the Cotton Bowl or something. And I think you're right about Florida playing potentially a Big Ten team like Wisconsin. I mean, it's weird with COVID; they might only play like 6 games or 5 or 6 or 7 games or something like that. But I think if I mean we're gonna have to see how the rest of the season shapes up because right now it's what if because we don't know who the top 4 is. But I think Florida Notre Dame's at the top of my list, and then I think Florida Oklahoma because Oklahoma obviously historically has been good. Lincoln Riley's been really good at Oklahoma, and so I think they're going to figure things out as the season goes on. And it's a little too late for the playoff, but they could still get a good bowl game against a really good SEC team.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's gonna go ahead and wrap up the video for today. Again, make sure to like and subscribe, and comment any differing opinions that you have, or any concerns, or anything else that you think of. Follow us on Twitter. You get a lot of live notifications on that. Maybe even a little bit more than you'd hope, but we like tweeting during games. It's fun. We also say our lines on there. You can get them earlier than the Friday that we post them, or just get the updates on our lines just to see where we're at. And make sure to listen to us on Spotify if you don't have enough time, at the Dual Threat Podcast on there. And just follow us on TikTok if you want to as well. We sometimes post some clips on there. And thank you for coming to the video, and have a good day.